I found out my father died through a Facebook post. Not even his obituary, just some random comment offering condolences to my half-sister Rosalind. 3 hours of frantic Googling later, I discovered he'd been dead for 2 days, and his funeral was tomorrow morning. My name is Sophia, and my father erased me from his life when I was 12. Now, 20 years later, he'd managed to erase me from his death too. My hands shook as I dialed Ria's number. She picked up on the second ring. "He's dead," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The great Ira Owens is dead, and they didn't even bother to tell me." "Oh my God, Soph!" Ria's voice softened. "Are you okay?" "I'm fantastic." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "They're having this big fancy funeral at St. Michael's tomorrow. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Everyone except his firstborn daughter." "Those bastards?" Ria paused. "What are you going to do?" I stared at my laptop screen, at the sleek funeral announcement posted by Wellington and Sons Funeral Home. "Beloved husband, father, and pillar of the community," it read. What a joke. What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to crash my father's funeral. Sophia, don't try to talk me out of this. I closed my laptop with more force than necessary. 20 years of pretending I don't exist. 20 years of watching him play perfect daddy to Rosalind in August, while I got nothing. Not even a birthday card. "I'm not trying to talk you out of it," Ria said. "I'm coming with you." That stopped me short. "What?" "You shouldn't have to face this alone. I'll pick you up at 9. I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thanks, Ria." After hanging up, I paced my apartment, unable to sit still. My phone buzzed. A text from Theo, my friend who worked as a PI. "Heard about your dad. Need anything?" I typed back quickly. "Info. Everything you can find about his business dealings in the last 20 years. "On it," came the immediate response. "But Soph, what's your endgame here?" I walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the city lights. What was my endgame? The truth was, I didn't know exactly. But I knew I couldn't let them bury him tomorrow with everyone thinking he was some kind of saint. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification. More condolences on the Wellington and Sons website. I scrolled through them, recognizing names from my childhood. Daniel Perry, Dad's business partner, had written a touching tribute about their 30-year friendship. Mary, my father's second wife, had posted something sickeningly sweet about her beloved husband. The rage built inside me as I read each message. Every single one painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize. A loving father, a devoted husband, a generous friend. I grabbed my keys and headed out, needing air. The night was cool, and the streets were quiet. Outside a corner store, I stopped and called the one person who might understand. "Mom? Sophia? It's late, honey. Is everything okay?" "Dad's dead." The words came out in a rush. "They're having the funeral tomorrow, and they didn't tell us." A long silence followed. When Mom spoke again, her voice was tight. "Are you surprised?" "No." I kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk. "I'm going to the funeral." "Sophia, I have to, Mom. I can't let them pretend anymore. I can't let them bury all his lies with him." She sighed. "Just be careful. Your father," she caught herself. "Ira had powerful friends." "I know." I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. "But I'm not that scared little girl anymore, and I'm done being invisible." When I got home, I pulled out the one photo I had kept of him, taken on my 10th birthday. We were both smiling at the camera, his hand on my shoulder. 2 years later, he walked out on us, married Mary, and started a new perfect family. The smiling man in the photo disappeared, replaced by someone who could look right through me if we passed on the street. I placed the photo face down on my desk and opened my laptop again. Time to do some research of my own. Tomorrow, they'd all be there. Mary, Rosalind, August, Daniel, and all the others who helped maintain my father's carefully constructed facade. Tomorrow, they'd learn that karma doesn't care about perfect reputations or carefully maintained lies. Tomorrow, they'd learn that the daughter they tried to forget hadn't forgotten them. I cracked my knuckles and started typing. The funeral wasn't until 10 a.m. I had all night to prepare. St. Michael's Church loomed before me, its stone facade a monument to old money and older secrets. Rhea squeezed my hand as we watched the mourners file in, all dressed in expensive black, all wearing masks of solemn grief. "There's still time to turn back," she whispered. I straightened my black dress. Simple, elegant, and probably worth less than the shoes on any of these people's feet. "No, there isn't." We slipped in through the side entrance, finding seats near the back. The church was packed, just as I'd expected. My father always did know how to draw a crowd. Then I saw them, my replacement family. Mary sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Beside her, Rosalind looked like a fashion magazine's version of grief in her designer morning wear. August, my half-brother, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Jesus," Rhea muttered. "They really do look perfect, don't they?" "Huh, that's the point." I watched as Daniel Perry, looking distinguished in his tailored suit, leaned over to whisper something to Mary. "It's all for show." The organ began to play, and everyone rose. The service started with all the pomp and circumstance money could buy. A string quartet played my father's favorite classical pieces. Important people stood up to share carefully crafted memories of a man they never truly knew. "Ira was more than a business partner," Daniel said from the pulpit, his voice thick with emotion. "He was a brother to me, a man of integrity, of vision." I dug my nails into my palms, fighting the urge to scream. Rhea must have noticed because she grabbed my wrist. "Breathe," she whispered. "Just breathe." The eulogies continued. A senator spoke about my father's contributions to the community. A charity director praised his generosity. Each word was another brick in the wall of lies they'd built around him. Finally, Mary stood up, clutching a piece of paper. "Before I share my memories of my beloved husband," she began, her voice wavering perfectly, "I'd like to thank you all for coming. Ira would have been so touched to see how many lives he impacted." I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed through the church. Heads turned. Whispers started. "I have a memory to share," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Mary froze mid-sentence. Rosalind's perfect composure cracked as she whipped around to stare at me. August looked confused, but Daniel's face went white. I walked down the aisle, feeling hundreds of eyes on me. The whispers grew louder. Some of the older attendees recognized me. I could tell by their sharp intakes of breath. "Who is that?" I heard someone whisper. "Is that... Oh my God, that's his daughter. The first one." I reached the front of the church and turned to face the congregation. Mary had backed away from the pulpit, her hand pressed to her throat. "My name is Sophia," I announced. "Though I doubt many of you remember me. I'm Ira's daughter, his first daughter, the one he erased from his life 20 years ago." The whispers turned to murmurs. Rosalind stood up, her face flushed. "This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I laughed. "You know what's inappropriate? Not telling your father's child that he died. Not including her in his obituary. Pretending she doesn't exist for 20 years. "Security!" Mary called out weakly. "Please, don't bother." I pulled out my phone. "I have something you all need to hear. Something about the man you're all here to celebrate." Daniel stepped forward, his face urgent. "Sophia, please." "What's wrong, Daniel? Worried about what I might say?" I met his eyes and he flinched. "Worried about what I might know?" The murmurs grew louder. I could see uncertainty spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. August was staring at me with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Rosalind looked like she might be sick. "This is my father's funeral," Mary said, finding her voice. "How dare you? How dare I?" I turned to face her. "How dare you pretend to be the grieving widow when you helped him abandon his first family? How dare you act like he was some kind of saint when you know exactly what kind of man he really was?" A security guard appeared at the side door. I knew my time was running out, but I'd accomplished what I came for. The cracks were showing in their perfect facade. "I'll go," I said, holding up my hands. "But this isn't over. The truth about Ira is going to come out piece by piece, and none of you can stop it." As I walked back down the aisle, head held high, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the church's stained glass windows. I looked different than the scared little girl in that birthday photo. I looked strong, determined. Outside, Rhea was waiting by the car, her face worried. "Did you do what you needed to do?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "No, but I've started." The morning after the funeral, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Local news outlets wanted statements. Old family friends suddenly remembered I existed. But the message that caught my attention came from Theo. "Found something. Meet me at Carlo's Coffee, now." I arrived to find Theo already seated in a corner booth, his laptop open and a stack of papers beside him. His tie was loose, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You should see what I found." He pushed a manila folder toward me. "Your father's company? It's built on sand." I opened the folder and started reading. Numbers swam before my eyes. Bank transfers, shell companies, suspicious investments. What am I looking at? 20 years of creative accounting. Theo leaned forward. "And that's just the start. Your father and Daniel were running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. They were, well, isn't this cozy?" We both looked up. Daniel stood there, coffee in hand, trying to look casual but failing miserably. His eyes darted to the papers spread across our table. "Mind if I join you?" Without waiting for an answer, he sat down next to me, forcing me to scoot over. "Actually, we do mind," I said, but he ignored me. "That was quite a show you put on yesterday," he said, stirring his coffee. "Mary's beside herself. Rosalind had to take anxiety medication. Is that what you wanted?" "What I want is the truth," I said. "And looking at these papers, it seems like you might be able to help with that." Daniel's stirring stopped. "I don't know what you think you've found." "Wire transfers to offshore accounts?" Theo interrupted. "Shell companies in the Caymans? Should I go on?" The color drained from Daniel's face. "Who exactly are you?" "Someone who's very good at finding things people try to hide," Theo replied with a smile. Daniel's friendly facade cracked. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low. "You're playing with fire. Your father." "My father is dead," I cut in. "He can't protect you anymore." A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw. "You have no idea what you're doing. There are people involved, powerful people. Walk away now while you still can." "Or what?" I leaned closer. "You'll erase me too?" "Sorry, Daniel, but that's already been done. I have nothing left to lose." He stood up abruptly, his coffee forgotten. "This is your last warning, Sophia. For your own good, let it go." After he left, Theo whistled low. "Well, that was dramatic." "He's scared," I said, watching Daniel's retreating back through the window. "Good." My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. It was August. "Can we meet, alone?" I showed the message to Theo. "Think it's a trap? Only one way to find out." He started gathering the papers. "But maybe meet somewhere public, and let me run a background check first." 2 hours later, I sat in a busy park, watching August approach. He looked different outside the church, younger, less polished. He sat down beside me on the bench, keeping his distance. "I didn't know about you," he said without preamble. "Not really. Dad mentioned once that he had another family, but—" He trailed off, looking lost. "But it was easier not to ask questions?" He nodded, looking ashamed. "After yesterday, I started digging. Found old photos, news articles about Dad's first marriage, about you. And? And I think—" He took a deep breath. "I think maybe everything I knew about my father was a lie." A jogger passed by. Children laughed on the playground nearby. Normal life continuing while August's world unraveled, just like mine had 20 years ago. This morning, he continued, I overheard Mom and Daniel arguing. They were talking about accounts that needed to be moved, about people who needed to be handled. They didn't know I was listening, but now you're scared. I finished for him. He nodded again. What do you know about Dad's business? Enough to bring it all down. I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. The question is, whose side are you on? August was quiet for a long moment, watching the children on the playground. I always wondered why Rosalind was Dad's favorite, he said finally. Why she was getting the company, even though I'm the one with the business degree. Now I'm wondering if maybe she knows things too. Help me, I said. Help me expose the truth. All of it. He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something of myself in his face. That same determination, that same need for truth. Okay, he said, but we have to be careful. Daniel, he's not just Dad's partner, he's dangerous. I thought about the papers Theo had found, about Daniel's threats in the coffee shop. I'm counting on it, I said. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Mary's house was exactly as I remembered it from the society page photos, a sprawling mansion that screamed old money and careful cultivation. I sat in my car across the street, watching the security guard make his rounds. My phone buzzed. August. Gate code is 48921. Mom's in her study. Rosalind's out. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The gate opened smoothly, with August's code, and I walked up the manicured path like I belonged there. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled of lilies and lemon polish. Family photos lined the walls, perfect moments captured in expensive frames. I wasn't in any of them. Who let you in? Mary's voice cut through the silence. She stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. Hello, Mary. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled. Get out before I call the police. Call them, I said, climbing the stairs. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what I have to say about your husband's business practices. That stopped her. You're bluffing. I reached the top of the stairs and pulled out my phone, showing her photos of the documents Theo had found. Want to bet your comfortable life on that? Her face went pale. My study, now. The study was all dark wood and leather, reeking of power and privilege. Mary closed the door behind us and poured herself a drink with shaking hands. What do you want? The truth. I sat in one of the leather chairs. Let's start with why you helped my father abandon his first family. I didn't. She stopped when I held up my phone again. Fine. Your father was complicated. Try again. Mary downed her drink. He was in trouble, financial trouble, the kind that doesn't go away. I had family money, connections. He needed both. So you helped him fake bankruptcy, hide his assets, leave his first wife and daughter with nothing? I loved him, she whispered, and he promised things would be different with me, with our children. And were they? The door creaked open. Rosalind stood there, her face a mask of fury. What is she doing here? Asking the questions you should have asked years ago, I said. Like why Dad was grooming you to take over the company instead of August. Because I earned it, Rosalind snapped. Because you were willing to look the other way, I corrected. Weren't you? Mary set down her glass hard. That's enough. No, it's not. I stood up. Daniel's been moving money around, covering tracks, but he can't hide everything. Do you even know what your husband was involved in? Stop it, Rosalind said, but her voice wavered. The FBI is already investigating, I lied, watching their reactions. Mary's hand flew to her throat. Rosalind swayed slightly. Bingo. You're lying, Mary said, but the fear in her eyes told me everything. Am I? Ask Daniel about Project Sunrise. Ask him about the offshore accounts. Ask him why he's been calling in favors all week. Rosalind grabbed the doorframe for support. Mom? Get out, Mary whispered. Get out of my house. I walked to the door but turned back. You know what's funny? Dad could have had it all. Legally, ethically. He was brilliant enough. But he chose this instead. And now, you're all going down with him. In the hallway, I heard raised voices from the study. Accusations. Questions. The first cracks in their perfect world widening into chasms. August was waiting by my car. That bad? Worse. I showed him the recording app on my phone. But we got what we needed. They'll try to stop you, he said. Daniel has connections in the media, in the police. That's why we're not going to the media or the police. I smiled. Not yet. First, we're going to talk to the investors. The ones who trusted Dad with their life savings. They'll never believe you. They will when they see the proof, when they realize their money is gone. I got into my car. Want to come with me? He hesitated, looking back at the house. Through the study window, we could see Mary and Rosalind arguing, their shadows sharp against the curtains. They're not bad people, he said quietly. They're just lost. I know. I started the engine. That's why we're doing this. Sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it right. August got in the passenger seat. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Daniel's car turning into the driveway. Too late. The truth was already spreading, and no amount of damage control could stop it now. Where are we going? August asked. To see someone who's been waiting 20 years for answers. I turned onto the highway. It's time to visit my mom. Mom's apartment hadn't changed in 20 years. Same faded curtains, same worn furniture, same smell of coffee and lavender. August stood awkwardly by the door while Mom studied him from her armchair. You look like him, she finally said. Same eyes. I'm sorry, August blurted out. About everything. Mom waved away his apology. You were a child. Sit down, both of you. I made coffee. As we settled onto the couch, Theo burst through the door without knocking. His tie was completely gone now, and his hair stood on end. You need to see this, he said, opening his laptop on the coffee table. Daniel's been busy. We crowded around the screen. Bank statements, transfer records, emails, all dated within the last 48 hours. He's liquidating everything, Theo explained, moving assets offshore. But he's getting sloppy. Look at this. He pulled up an email chain. My mother leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses. Project Sunrise, she read. I remember that name. Your father mentioned it the week before he left us. It was their biggest scam, August said quietly. They promised investors triple returns through some revolutionary green energy technology. Except the technology didn't exist. Mom's hands started shaking. How much? Hundreds of millions, Theo said. And that's just what we can trace. My phone rang, Rosalind's number. I put it on speaker. Daniel's gone, she said without preamble. Her voice was thick with tears. He cleaned out the company accounts, all of them. Mom's having a breakdown. Where are you? I asked. Home. Please. I know I don't deserve your help, but... We're coming, I said, already standing. Don't talk to anyone else. Mom grabbed my arm. Be careful. Men like Daniel don't just disappear. They plan. I know. I hugged her tight. That's counting on it. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to the mansion. The security guard was gone. The front door stood open. Inside, we found Rosalind in the kitchen, surrounded by scattered papers. Mary sat at the counter, staring blankly at a half-empty wine bottle. He took everything, Rosalind said, looking up at us with red eyes. The investments, the pension funds, even Mom's personal accounts. It's all gone. Not everything, Theo said, setting up his laptop. He left a trail, and I think I know where he's heading. How? Mary asked, her first word since we arrived. Because I found this. Theo turned the screen toward us. A private flight booked for tomorrow morning, to a country with no extradition treaty. We have to stop him, August said. No, I replied. We have to let him run. Everyone stared at me. Think about it, I continued. If he runs, he proves his guilt. No one can deny the truth anymore, And once he's gone, the insurance policies kick in, Rosalind finished, realization dawning. The investor protection clauses. Exactly, I pulled out my phone. But first, we need to make sure he actually runs. Rosalind, call him. Tell him you know everything, and you're going to the FBI. She hesitated, then dialed. The call went to voicemail. Daniel, she said, her voice breaking perfectly. How could you? The FBI is coming. They know everything about Project Sunrise. About Dad. About all of it. She hung up. Now we wait, Theo said, typing rapidly. I've got alerts set up on his accounts, his passport. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel himself. You won! Happy now? I showed it to the others. No, Daniel, I said aloud. But I'm getting there. We spent the next few hours going through papers, piecing together the full scope of my father's and Daniel's deceptions. Mary eventually broke her silence, filling in gaps, explaining connections. With each revelation, the perfect facade crumbled further. Around midnight, Theo's laptop pinged. Got him. He just checked in for his flight. Send everything to the FBI, I said. All of it. What about us? Mary asked quietly. What happens to us? I looked at her, at Rosalind, at August, at the broken remains of my father's second perfect family. You start over, I said. The right way this time. Together? August asked. Maybe. I stood up, gathering my things. But first, we have to face what's coming, all of us. As I drove home that night, I thought about the birthday photo of me and Dad, about the little girl who used to believe in him completely. She was gone, just like his perfect facade, just like Daniel into the night. But something new was emerging from the ashes. Something real. Something true. My phone buzzed. A group text from August to me and Rosalind. Family meeting tomorrow? I smiled and typed back one word. Yes. The conference room at Theo's office buzzed with tension. Investors filled every chair, their faces a mix of anger and fear. At the front of the room, a projector displayed the evidence we'd gathered. 2 decades of fraud laid bare in spreadsheets and emails. My entire retirement fund, a man in the front row said, his voice breaking. Everything we had. It's not all gone, I assured him. That's why we called you here. There's a way forward, but we need your help. Rosalind stood up, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. What my sister says is true. As the legal heir to the company, I'm prepared to sign over everything. All assets, all holdings. To what end? Someone called out. Daniel's gone. The money's gone. Not all of it, Theo said, clicking to the next slide. We've traced about 40% of the funds. With the insurance policies and the company's remaining legitimate assets, we can recover close to 60% of your investments. A murmur ran through the room. August stepped forward. But we need you to do something first, he said. We need you to go public. All of you, tell your stories. Show the world what our father and Daniel did. The door opened, and Mary walked in, looking smaller without her usual polish. I'll start, she said. I knew. Not everything, but enough. I kept quiet to protect my children, my lifestyle. I was wrong. The room fell silent. Mrs. Owens, one of the investors said, do you understand what you're admitting to? I do. She straightened her shoulders. And I'm prepared to face the consequences. My phone buzzed. A message from Rhea. Turn on the news. Now. I grabbed the remote and switched on the wall-mounted TV. Daniel's face filled the screen, his private jet grounded on a runway in Dubai. The headline scrolled beneath. International manhunt. Business mogul caught in massive fraud scheme. They got him, August whispered. The investors erupted in questions and exclamations. I raised my hands for quiet. This is just the beginning, I said. The FBI will want statements from all of you. It won't be easy. The media will be relentless. But if we stand together, why should we trust you? A woman interrupted. You're his daughter. Because I'm the daughter he abandoned, I replied. The one he tried to erase. And because I'm not asking you to trust me, I'm asking you to fight back. Rosalind pulled out a stack of papers. These are the documents surrendering my inheritance rights. I'm signing them now, in front of you all. As she signed, Mary stepped forward again. My personal assets will also be liquidated to help cover the losses. It won't be much, but it's a start, the first investor said. Others nodded. The meeting lasted hours. People shared stories of how they'd trusted my father, how Daniel had charmed them with promises of impossible returns. Each story made the truth clearer. This wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal, about broken trust. As the last investor left, Theo got another alert on his laptop. FBI's here. They want to talk to all of us. Good, I said. Let's give them everything. Sophia, Mary called as I headed for the door. What you're doing? Thank you. I turned to face her. I'm not doing it for you. I know. She twisted her wedding ring. But you're saving my children anyway, saving all of us from living a lie. Before I could respond, 2 FBI agents entered the room. They looked exactly like you'd expect. Dark suits, serious faces. Ms. Owens? One asked, looking between me and Rosalind. That's both of us, I said. Where do you want to start? From the beginning, the agent replied, pulling out a recorder. Tell us everything. As we sat down to give our statements, I caught August's eye. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come. Rosalind was already talking, her voice steady as she detailed years of deception. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Mom. Proud of you, baby. Give them hell. I took a deep breath and faced the agents. It started 20 years ago, I began, with a man who cared more about appearances than truth. The story poured out, not just mine, but all of ours. A story of greed and betrayal, of families broken and rebuilt, of truth finally breaking free from carefully constructed lies. Outside the conference room windows, the sun was setting on my father's empire. But something new was rising in its place. Something built on honesty, on accountability, on real connections. Ready? The agent asked, pen poised. Ready, I replied. And I was. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters. 3 months had passed since Daniel's arrest, and today was the day everything would change. I adjusted my blazer and gripped Ria's hand as we pushed through the crowd. Ms. Owens, is it true Daniel Perry has agreed to testify? What about the missing millions? Any comment on your father's role in the fraud? Inside, the marble halls echoed with whispers and footsteps. We found August and Rosalind waiting by the courtroom doors, both looking like they hadn't slept. Daniel's already inside, August said quietly. He looks broken. Good, I replied, but my voice lacked the venom I'd expected. The bailiff called us in. The courtroom was packed. Investors, reporters, curious onlookers. Mary sat in the front row, her designer clothes replaced by something simpler, more honest. Daniel stood as we entered, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished. All rise, the bailiff announced. As the judge entered, I felt a shift in the air. This was it, the moment of truth. Before we proceed with sentencing, the judge began, Mr. Perry has requested to make a statement. Daniel shuffled to the podium. His hands shook as he unfolded a piece of paper. I've spent my life building walls of lies, he said, his voice rough. Ira and I, we started small. Just a few shortcuts, a few hidden accounts. But lies are like cancer. They spread. Before we knew it, we were trapped in our own deceptions. He looked up, directly at me. Sophia was the first victim. Ira couldn't face her innocence, her truth. So we erased her, just like we erased everyone who threatened to expose us. The courtroom was silent now, hanging on every word. The money's gone, he continued. Most of it lost in bad investments we covered up with more fraud. But I've provided the FBI with everything. Every account, every transaction, every name, including names of people in this room who helped us. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several well-dressed men slipped out the back door. Your Honor, Daniel's lawyer stood. My client's cooperation should be considered in his sentencing. Sit down, the judge ordered. She turned to Daniel. Continue. There's nothing left to say except, I'm sorry. To everyone we hurt. To the families we destroyed. To Sophia, who had the courage to expose what we all wanted to hide. He sat down heavily. The judge shuffled her papers. Mr. Perry, your cooperation is noted. However, the severity of your crimes. She paused, looking over her glasses. 25 years. No possibility of parole? The gavel cracked like thunder. As the bailiff led Daniel away, he stopped briefly beside me. Your father would be proud, he whispered. Not of what you exposed, of how strong you became. I watched him disappear through the side door, remembering the powerful man who'd threatened me in the coffee shop. Karma had finally caught up. Outside, the reporters swarmed again, but this time I was ready. Yes, I'll make a statement, I announced. Today isn't about revenge. It's about truth, about facing our mistakes and trying to make them right. Rosalind stepped up beside me. The company is being restructured. All recovered assets will go to the victims of the fraud. My brother and I are starting over, the right way. And Mary Owens, someone called out. Is cooperating fully with authorities, August answered, and working to make amends. Later, at a small cafe away from the chaos, our unlikely family gathered. Mom had joined us, sitting between me and Rosalind, like it was the most natural thing in the world. What now? August asked, stirring his coffee. Now we rebuild, I said. Not just the company, everything. Together? Rosalind asked hesitantly. Mom reached across the table and took her hand. Together. My phone buzzed. A text from Theo. Found something in your dad's old files. Come by when you can. You need to see this. Everything okay? Ria asked, noticing my expression. I looked around the table, at my mother's strength, at August's determination, at Rosalind's growing honesty, at the family we were building from the ashes of my father's lies. Yeah, I said, putting my phone away. Everything's exactly as it should be. The afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting long shadows. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't afraid of what those shadows might hide. The truth was out, justice was served, and tomorrow was a new day. Sometimes you have to tear everything down to build something real, something true, something that lasts. Theo's office was dark except for his desk lamp when I arrived. He sat staring at an old leather journal, his expression unreadable. Found this in a safety deposit box, he said as I sat down. Your father's personal diary. The key was hidden in Daniel's files. My hands trembled as I took the journal. The leather was soft, worn from years of use. Inside, my father's familiar handwriting filled page after page. Read the last entry, Theo said quietly. I flipped to the final page, dated just days before his death. Sophia was right all along. The truth always finds its way out. Daniel's getting sloppy, desperate. The house of cards is falling. Maybe it's better this way. My daughter, my first daughter, she's stronger than I ever was. She'll find this eventually. She'll understand why I kept her away from all of this. It wasn't to protect myself. It was to protect her from becoming like me. There's more, Theo said, sliding an envelope across the desk. This was with it. Inside was a bank statement and a letter. A separate account, untouched for 20 years, in my name. The balance made my head spin. He set this up the day he left, Theo explained. Never touched it. Never told anyone about it. My phone rang. Rosalind. You need to come to the house, she said without preamble. We found something in Dad's study. 20 minutes later, I stood in the study with Rosalind, August, and Mary. The wall safe stood open, revealing stacks of documents. Look at these, August said, spreading papers across the desk. Dad was documenting everything, every fraud, every lie, but also every legitimate deal, every real investment. He was building a roadmap, Rosalind realized. showing us how to fix it all. Mary picked up a photo from the safe. Me at 12, just before he left. On the back, in his handwriting, the price of my sins. Ah, he never hung any photos of you, Mary said softly. But he kept this, in the safe with everything that mattered. My phone buzzed again. Mom. Come home, bring them all. We found Mom in her small kitchen, the table set for 6. The smell of her lasagna, the one she used to make for special occasions, filled the apartment. Sit, she commanded, all of you. As we ate, the walls between us crumbled further. Mary shared stories of my father's sleepless nights. August talked about catching him crying in his study. Rosalind admitted she'd found the photo of me years ago, but had been too scared to ask about it. He was a complicated man, Mom said, refilling wine glasses. Deeply flawed. But maybe, in his own broken way, he tried to protect the things he loved. Even if he did it all wrong. What do we do with all this? August asked. The journal, the documents, the account? We do what he couldn't, I said. We make it right. Not just the money, everything. The company, Rosalind added. We could rebuild it, legitimately this time. Together, August said. It wasn't a question anymore. Later, as everyone was leaving, Mary stopped me. I found this too, she said, handing me a small box. Inside was my father's wedding ring from his marriage to Mom. He kept it all these years, she said, in his desk drawer. I think he wanted you to have it. I slipped the ring onto my thumb, too big for any other finger. It felt warm, heavy with history and meaning. Thank you, I said, and meant it. After everyone left, I sat with Mom on her old couch, the journal open between us. We read together, filling in the gaps of 20 years, understanding finally blooming in the space between what was and what could be. You did it, baby, Mom said, squeezing my hand. You broke the cycle. I touched the ring on my thumb, thinking of the father I'd lost and the family I'd found, of truth and lies, of endings and beginnings. No, I said. We did it, all of us. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, the pieces of our broken family were finally falling into place, not into the perfect picture my father had tried to create, but into something real, something true, something that would last. I opened my father's journal one last time, adding my own entry beneath his final words. The truth didn't destroy us, Dad. It set us free. And for the first time since I'd seen that obituary online, I felt completely, utterly at peace.
The gentle morning sunlight streams through the window, softly illuminating my face. As usual, I wake up before the alarm clock rings. Even at 62, the habit from my 30 years as a high school teacher is hard to shake off. Good morning, Eleanor, my husband George greets me with a sleepy voice from beside me. At 65, he still maintains his early rising habit from his days as a police officer, even after retirement. Good morning, George. Another beautiful day, I smile in response as I get up from bed. I open the curtains and take in the morning view of Cedarville, Ohio. It's a small college town of about 4,000 people, but it exudes a peaceful atmosphere with its lush greenery. As I prepare breakfast, I mentally organize today's schedule. Our son Mike and daughter-in-law Sarah are heading off to work, so we'll be looking after our 2-year-old grandson, Jacob. Mike is busy as a researcher at a major pharmaceutical company, while Sarah works at a local real estate agency. Helping the young couple balance work and childcare is one of the joys of being grandparents. George, don't forget we're watching Jacob today, I remind him. Oh, of course. I'm looking forward to it. George looks up from his newspaper with a smile. Taking care of our grandson has become one of our greatest pleasures in life. After breakfast, I take a walk around the neighborhood. I exchange greetings with neighbors along the way. Good morning, Eleanor. Early as always, I see, Mrs. Johnson calls out while tending to her garden. Good morning, Linda. Your garden looks lovely, I reply. Thank you. I'm planning to sell some of these flowers at the church bazaar, she says. It's moments like these that remind me of the strong sense of community here. We've lived in Cedarville for over 40 years, and this warm community has become our cherished home. When I return home, I receive a call from Sarah. Good morning, Mom. We'll be dropping off Jacob soon, she says. Of course, Sarah. Don't worry about a thing, I assure her. As I hang up, I feel a slight twinge of mixed emotions. My relationship with Sarah isn't bad, but sometimes I sense differences in our values. We occasionally disagree on small things like child-rearing methods or household role division. However, for the sake of family harmony, I always try my best to be understanding. Just before noon, Mike brings Jacob over. Mom, thanks again for today. We'll pick him up in the evening, he says. All right, Mike. Take care, I reply. As I embrace Jacob, I feel warmth spread through my heart at my young grandson's innocent smile. Grandma. Jacob laughs gleefully, throwing his arms around my neck. In the afternoon, while playing with Jacob in the garden, some neighborhood children join us. The sound of children's laughter fills the air, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Eleanor, how about some tea? George calls from the porch. Thank you, George, I reply gratefully. We sit on the porch, watching our grandson and the neighborhood children play, enjoying a tranquil moment together. Our retirement life is filled with these small moments of happiness. In the evening, when Mike comes to pick up Jacob, he looks a bit tired. What's wrong, Mike? Is something bothering you? I ask, concerned. Oh, it's nothing, Mom. Just busy at work. He trails off. I'm a bit worried about my son's demeanor, but I decide not to press further. The young couple must have their own concerns. As I lie in bed that night, I reflect on the day. Even in our peaceful daily life, I sense small worries and changes affecting each family member. I wonder what tomorrow will bring as I quietly close my eyes. After finishing my morning routine, I was waiting in the living room for Jacob to arrive. Mike's tired appearance yesterday was still on my mind, and I thought I'd try to have a more detailed conversation with him today. Outside the window, the soft early summer sunlight gently illuminated the streets of Cedarville. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Looking at the clock, I realized it was too early for Mike to arrive. I wonder who that could be, I thought as I headed towards the door. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing there. One was a man in his 50s, and the other was a younger woman in her 30s. They were both in uniform, but something felt off. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. We're here to discuss a matter with you, the older officer said. Yes, what can I help you with? I asked, feeling a bit tense. "Can we talk inside?" the young female officer asked. There was a hint of urgency in her voice that I found unsettling. I led them into the living room. As I gestured for them to sit on the sofa, they settled down with a somewhat uneasy air. "We're here on a rather delicate matter," the older officer began. His expression was grave. "What's happened?" I asked, feeling anxious. "An arrest warrant has been issued for your grandson, Jacob Thompson." The moment I heard those words, my mind went blank. "What? What did you say?" My voice rose involuntarily. Surely there must be some mistake. "Jacob is only 2 years old," I said, desperately trying to make sense of the situation. The older officer cleared his throat and said, "We understand that this is an unusual situation. However, we have our orders." Confusion and questions were swirling in my mind. An arrest warrant for a 2-year-old child. How could that be possible? Even when George was in the police force, I'd never heard of anything like this. What exactly is he being charged with? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. The young female officer answered, "We can't disclose the details, but we have information suggesting involvement in a serious economic crime." Hearing those words, I became even more bewildered. A 2-year-old child involved in an economic crime. It made absolutely no sense. This must be a mistake. Jacob is truly just a 2-year-old child. He can't even count money by himself, let alone commit an economic crime, I explained desperately. The two officers exchanged glances. I sensed something akin to nervousness in their demeanor. "Mrs. Thompson, we understand the unusual nature of this situation. However, we have orders from above." The older officer began, but the younger one interjected. "Actually, there is a way to resolve this situation," she said. I listened intently. "If you pay bail, we won't need to take Jacob into custody," the young officer explained. "Bail? How much?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure despite my agitation. $100,000. I gasped when I heard the amount. $100,000. Such a large sum, I couldn't possibly. "We can arrange for installments. $30,000 now, and the rest can be paid later," the older officer quickly added. The feeling that something was very wrong grew stronger within me. Police procedures couldn't possibly be this simple. And the behavior of these two officers was strange. "Could I have some time to think about this?" "I'd like to consult with my husband," I said, trying to buy some time. The two officers visibly tensed. "But this is an urgent matter." "I understand. But we're talking about a large sum of money." "I need a little time," I said firmly. The officers reluctantly stood up. "All right, we'll return in 2 hours. Please make your decision by then." As I saw them off, various questions were swirling in my mind. Was this really an official procedure? Why would there be an arrest warrant for a 2-year-old child? And were these two really police officers? After closing the door, I took a deep breath. I needed to think calmly. First, I should call George. He would know about police procedures. And I needed to contact Mike and Sarah too. As I reached for the phone, I felt a sense of unease along with a premonition that something big was about to happen. I let out a deep sigh as I hung up the phone. My conversation with George had made the abnormality of this situation even clearer. "Eleanor, listen carefully." George's voice had maintained its usual calm. "First of all, it's almost impossible for an arrest warrant to be issued for a 2-year-old child. Also, the police would never directly demand bail money. This is most likely a scam." Recalling George's words, I started jotting down notes. I listed the suspicious points about the two individuals posing as police officers, the slight oddity in their uniforms, their nervous behavior, their demand for immediate bail payment. As I wrote each point down, it became increasingly clear how many suspicious elements there were. Looking out the window, I saw Mrs. Johnson working in her garden. She might have noticed something. I went out to the garden and called out to her over the fence. "Linda, do you have a moment?" "What is it, Eleanor? Is something worrying you?" Mrs. Johnson approached, taking off her soil-covered gloves. I briefly explained the situation. Mrs. Johnson's expression changed to one of surprise and concern. "Oh my, what a terrible thing." She frowned. "Come to think of it, I did see an unfamiliar car parked earlier. It looked like a police car, but something seemed off about it." My heart raced at this information. "What kind of car was it?" Mrs. Johnson provided me with details. The make, color, even part of the license plate number. I hurriedly wrote it all down. "Thank you, Linda. This is very helpful." Back in the house, I tried calling Mike. But there was no answer. I left several messages on his voicemail, but received no response. Anxiety spread through my chest. Next, I tried calling Sarah, and she answered immediately. "What is it, Mom?" There was an odd uneasiness in Sarah's voice. "Sarah, something serious has happened. It's about Jacob." As I began to explain the situation, Sarah's reaction was strange. Rather than surprise or concern, I sensed something more like panic. "I see. But Mom, shouldn't you just do what the police say?" I felt uneasy about those words. The normal Sarah would have been much more agitated. "Sarah, do you know something about this?" "No. Nothing." Her voice was trembling. "Sorry, Mom. I'm at work right now. I'll call you back later." The call ended. Various questions swirled in my head. Sarah's behavior was clearly unusual. Was she hiding something? Looking at the clock, I realized it was almost time for the fake officers to return. I hurriedly began my preparations. I went over the response methods George had taught me and prepared to gather evidence. I slipped a small voice recorder into my pocket and made sure my phone camera was ready. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and headed for the door. In my mind, I organized all the information I had gathered. The suspicious points about the fake officers, Mrs. Johnson's testimony, Sarah's strange reaction. Before opening the door, I steeled my resolve. I had to unravel this mystery and protect my family. For the sake of my grandson Jacob, and for the truth. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, I whispered quietly, "Now, let's reveal the truth." When I opened the door, the two fake officers were standing there as expected. "Mrs. Thompson, have you made your decision?" the older man asked, unable to hide his impatience. Maintaining a facade of calm, I replied, "Yes, I've thought it over. But could you please show me the official warrant?" The two visibly flustered, exchanging glances. "Well, that's..." the younger woman stammered. "And I'd like to see your police badges as well," I said firmly. "We apologize, but we didn't bring them today." "I see. In that case, let me call the station to confirm," I said, reaching for my smartphone. The two panicked. No, that won't be necessary," the older man hurriedly tried to stop me. We'll be leaving now." With that, they hastily departed. I watched their retreating figures with a cold gaze. As I closed the door, I felt my heart racing. This gave me near certainty. But I still didn't have the full picture. That night, I received a call from Mike. "Mom, what's going on? I had a bunch of missed calls from you." I explained the situation. Mike's voice trembled with surprise and anger. "What in the world?" "I'm coming home right away, Mom." After hanging up, I was pondering if I had overlooked anything. That's when I noticed Sarah's smartphone on the living room table. She must have forgotten it in her haste to leave earlier. I hesitated. It's not right to invade someone's privacy. But now, our family's safety was at stake. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the smartphone. When I swiped the screen, it wasn't locked. Looking at the recent call history, I noticed frequent interactions with an unknown number. I pressed one of them, and a voicemail played. "Sarah, proceed as planned. I'll wipe out your debt. This is your chance to outsmart your husband and in-laws." I trembled at the man's voice. Was this the beginning of it all? But why would Sarah do such a thing? I heard the front door open. Mike had returned. "Mom, I'm home." Mike's voice was a mix of exhaustion and worry. After I explained the situation in detail, Mike's expression clouded. "Sarah, what on earth are you thinking?" Just then, the doorbell rang. When we opened it, Mr. Wilson from across the street was standing there. "Eleanor, I'm sorry for coming at this hour. But I think you should see this." What he handed over was footage from a security camera. It showed the fake officers in a secret meeting with Sarah. I thought this looked strange, so I checked it out. Don't you think this is odd? We were speechless. The evidence was clear. At that moment, the front door opened, and Sarah walked in. Her expression froze. "Sarah, can you explain this?" Mike's voice was low, controlled. Sarah collapsed to the floor. "I'm sorry. I'll tell you everything." Her confession began. She revealed her gambling addiction and the massive debt she had accumulated. She spoke of her struggling marriage and her jealousy over Mike's dependence on his parents. Finally, she admitted to being coerced into this scheme by debt collectors who were threatening her. But I didn't really want to do it. Deceiving my family. Sarah's voice trembled. Mike let out a deep sigh. Why didn't you talk to me? We could have solved this together. I watched the two of them with mixed emotions. Anger and sadness, but also a bit of relief. At least now, the truth was out in the open. Well, let's report this to the police, I said quietly. The real police, this time. With those words, the atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten a bit. A long night was coming to an end. Difficult times lay ahead, no doubt. But now that we knew the truth, we could surely overcome this trial as a family. Looking out the window, I could see the first light of dawn peeking through. It was the start of a new day. And the beginning of a new chapter for our family. As the morning sun began to softly illuminate the room, we heard the sound of police sirens approaching. The real police had arrived. We went out to the front door to greet them. Thompson family, we apologize for the delay, Detective Johnson, a veteran officer, addressed us. Please tell us the details of what happened. We took turns explaining the events of the past few days. Sarah's confession, Mr. Wilson's security camera footage, and the actions of the fake police officers. Detective Johnson listened intently with a serious expression. I see, I understand the situation now, the detective nodded. Actually, we've been seeing an increase in these types of scams recently. The perpetrators try to exploit family bonds to fraudulently obtain money. In this case, they targeted a 2-year-old child. Hearing those words, we once again realized the gravity of the situation. The unrealistic scenario of an arrest warrant for 2-year-old Jacob was a trap designed to cloud our judgment. Sarah, the detective gently addressed her. Your cooperation will be key to solving this case. Can you help us catch the culprits? Sarah nodded through her tears. Yes, I'll do anything. I don't want to lie anymore. A few hours later, the fake police officers were arrested. They were part of an organized fraud group that used tactics to extort money by exploiting family vulnerabilities. They had used Jacob's name simply because he was the youngest family member. The sheer absurdity of it had the effect of confusing the victim's judgment. Once the immediate crisis had passed, we took time as a family to face each other. We gathered in the living room, sipping tea and discussing things we hadn't been able to talk about before. Sarah, why didn't you come to us sooner? Mike asked quietly. Sarah answered with her head bowed, I was ashamed. Your parents are so wonderful, and I felt like I was a failure as a wife. So I escaped into gambling. I took Sarah's hand. You're not a failure as a wife, dear. Everyone has their own struggles. What's important is that we overcome them together. Mike nodded in agreement. That's right, Sarah. You don't have to bear this burden alone. From now on, let's talk about everything. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears at those words. I'm so sorry. Thank you. We spent a long time talking about our feelings, our future life, and about Jacob. Slowly but surely, I could feel our family bonds being repaired. A few days later, our neighbors gathered to throw us a small party. "Eleanor, you've been through quite an ordeal," Mrs. Johnson said gently. "We made it through thanks to everyone's help," I replied, filled with gratitude. Mr. Wilson approached us too. "I'm glad that footage was useful. If you ever need anything, just let me know." I felt a warmth in my chest, touched by the kindness of our community. In the middle of the party, Jacob came running to me. "Grandma." As I picked him up, I found myself tearing up. We had all come together as a family to protect this child. That night, I stepped out into the garden alone to look at the stars. The events of the past few days flashed through my mind like a slideshow. Fear, anxiety, anger, and finally, the relief and hope that followed. I've never felt the importance of family so strongly before. There's no such thing as a perfect family. But by understanding and supporting each other, we can overcome any difficulty. That's the true strength of family. This ordeal taught me that. From inside the house, I could hear the laughter of Mike, Sarah, and Jacob. I took a deep breath and looked up at the starry sky once more. "Thank you," I whispered softly. I'm not sure who I was thanking, but a definite feeling of gratitude spread through my chest. Tomorrow, a new day begins again. I'm sure it won't all be smooth sailing. But I know we can get through it together. As a family, and as members of this warm community. I quietly returned to the house. I, Barbara Walters, woke up in my Manhattan apartment as the morning sun streamed in. Even at 62, the habits from my days as an ABC News anchor haven't quite left me. As I brew my morning coffee, I gaze out the window at the greenery of Central Park. It's been 2 years since I retired, but I still find myself checking the news every morning. It's Taylor's day today, I smile to myself. It's my scheduled day with Taylor, my 4-year-old angelic granddaughter. I'm looking after her while my son Tom and his wife Rita are busy with work. Sitting at the dining table, nibbling on toast, I reflect on Tom and Rita's recent family situation. Tom is 35, working at an advertising agency in New York City. He's passionate about his work, always searching for new ideas. Rita, 33, teaches at an elementary school in Brooklyn. They both lead busy lives, but lately, I've noticed they seem somewhat tired. And then there's Taylor. Thinking about her makes my heart clench. Taylor has a mild developmental disability, with speech delays and social issues. She was diagnosed a year ago. Since then, Tom and Rita have been desperately searching for special support and therapy programs. Oh, I wish I could do anything for that child, I sighed deeply. The problem is the cost of support. Much of it isn't covered by insurance, and Tom and Rita are struggling financially. With the recession in the advertising industry, Tom's salary hasn't increased, and Rita's teacher's salary isn't enough. I know they're doing their best to manage, but the truth is, their debts are growing. I've offered financial assistance several times, but Tom has refused. "We'll manage on our own, Mom." "Don't worry," he says, and it breaks my heart every time. Tom always tries to put on a brave face for me. It must be his father's pride. I want to do something for Taylor, but I don't know how. Is there a way to help without hurting Tom and Rita's pride? This dilemma weighs on my mind daily. Looking at the clock, I realize it's almost time for Taylor to arrive. I hurry to get ready and start tidying the living room. I set out Taylor's favorite toys and prepare games to aid her development. The doorbell rings, and when I open it, Taylor jumps in with a beaming smile. "Grandma," she exclaims. Seeing that innocent smile makes all my worries disappear. "Welcome, my angel," I say, embracing Taylor. Grateful for the day ahead with her, I make a silent vow. I'll make sure you and your parents are happy. Somehow, I'll find a way. Reassuring myself, I take Taylor's hand and announce the start of our fun day together. 2 weeks after that enjoyable time with Taylor, our family decided to have a barbecue in a park near Lake George on a Sunday. Tom had suggested, "Let's spend some quality family time together." There was an unusual brightness in his voice. He must want to relieve some of the recent tension. We left Manhattan early in the morning. In the car, Taylor was humming excitedly. Seeing her like this, I felt relieved inside. She's usually a woman of few words, but today she seems to be looking forward to it. "Hey, Taylor. I wonder what kind of fish we'll see today?" Rita gently asks. "Fish. Big ones," Taylor replies. At that moment, the car was filled with a warm atmosphere. After about a 3-hour drive, we arrived at our destination. The clear surface of Lake George spread out before us, with the surrounding trees swaying in the wind. The air was crisp, a completely different world from Manhattan. "Taylor can play freely here," I said aloud without thinking. Tom answered while unloading the luggage from the car. "Yes, that's right. It's been a while since I've done something for the family. I hope Taylor enjoys it too." I felt a bit uneasy about his words. Family time. It sounds almost like a duty. But I suppressed that feeling and responded with a smile. "Yes, it's going to be a fun day." As we started preparing for the barbecue, each family member took on a role. Tom was in charge of starting the fire, Rita was setting the table. I started preparing the ingredients. Taylor was picking flowers on the nearby grass. At first glance, it looked like an ideal family holiday. However, upon closer observation, I could sense an underlying tension. Tom's movements were awkward, and Rita's smile seemed a bit forced. There seemed to be more distance between them than usual. "Hey, how should we cook the meat today?" I asked. Tom answered a bit irritably, "It doesn't matter, Mom. Just leave it to me." I flinched for a moment at his attitude. But I didn't want to cause any problems here. Today is a day for family togetherness. As the preparations were in full swing, I was completely absorbed in cooking. While grilling vegetables on skewers, I suddenly realized something. Taylor was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Taylor?" I asked. Rita answered, "She was playing over there just a moment ago." "Tom, did you see her?" Tom shook his head. "No, I was watching the fire." Suddenly, anxiety crossed my mind. We had all been so focused on our tasks that we had taken our eyes off Taylor. "Taylor!" I called out loudly. There was no response. Tom and Rita finally seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. The three of us started searching the area separately. "Over here." We heard Rita's scream-like voice. We ran towards the lake. What we saw was Taylor's small body floating on the surface of the water. "Taylor!" Tom shouted, stripping off his clothes and jumping into the lake. Rita and I could only watch anxiously from the shore. Seconds later, Tom returned to the shore carrying Taylor. Taylor was unconscious, her face pale. "She's not breathing," Rita cried out. I tried desperately to stay calm. "Call 911. I told Rita, and I began performing CPR on Taylor. "Please, Taylor. Wake up," I called out prayerfully. Tom stood there in a daze. Fear and self-blame were visible in his eyes. When we heard the ambulance siren, Taylor coughed faintly. A glimmer of hope. But we were far from being able to relax. While the paramedics were loading Taylor onto a stretcher, all we could do was watch. Suddenly, Tom shouted, "Mom! Why did you take your eyes off her?" I caught my breath at those words. Should I be blamed? Or? Amidst the swirling confusion, regret, and anxiety, the ambulance drove away with Taylor. We were left standing there, unable to say a word. The scenery of Lake George, which should have been beautiful, now felt terrifyingly cold. As the sound of the ambulance siren faded into the distance, we were still standing by the lakeside. It was as if time had stopped. Even after the ambulance carrying Taylor disappeared from view, my eyes remained fixed on the distant road. Why did this happen? Rita's trembling voice broke the silence. She collapsed to her knees and began to sob. Tom was still standing there in his wet clothes, looking dazed. His eyes still held the color of fear and confusion. I took a deep breath. Someone had to stay calm. "Rita, it's okay. Taylor is a strong girl," I said gently. "Let's think about going to the hospital now." Rita looked up at me. A faint light of hope shone in her tear-filled eyes. "Yes, that's right," she answered in a shaky voice. "We need to go to Taylor." Tom seemed to have finally come to his senses. I'll get the car ready," he muttered. Then he quickly headed towards the parking lot. I helped Rita stand up and gently put my arm around her shoulder. "It's going to be all right. Let's get through this together." However, contrary to those words, anxiety was swirling inside me. Is Taylor safe? Will there be any lasting effects? And why didn't anyone notice? When Tom brought the car around, we hurriedly got in. The car was enveloped in a heavy silence. "Which hospital?" Tom asked from the driver's seat. "Glens Falls Hospital," I answered. "That's what the paramedics said." As the car started moving and we headed towards the hospital, Rita kept checking her mobile phone repeatedly. "Why hasn't the hospital contacted us?" she muttered anxiously. "They're probably still running tests," I tried to reassure her. "If there's good news, they'll contact us right away." However, those words rang hollow. The tension in the car increased with time. Suddenly, Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly and shouted, "Damn it! Why did this happen?" Rita and I jumped at his voice. Tom's anger and self-blame had burst out all at once. "Tom, calm down," I said, trying to reason with him. "Focus on driving safely now." But Tom's anger didn't subside. "Mom, why did you take your eyes off her?" He glared at me in the back seat. "You said you would look after Taylor." I caught my breath at those words. "Tom, I was also preparing the food." "No excuses," Tom yelled. "It's your responsibility because you took your eyes off her." The atmosphere in the car froze. Rita looked at her husband with a surprised expression, and I was at a loss for words. "Tom," Rita said in a small voice, "it's everyone's responsibility. None of us were paying attention to Taylor." However, Tom wouldn't listen. "No, Mom said she would watch her. We're busy with work, but Mom has free time." Those words sent a pain through my heart. "Tom, that's not." Suddenly, the car came to an abrupt stop. We had arrived at the hospital parking lot. Tom got out of the car and turned to Rita. "We'll go alone." "Mom, you go home." "But, Tom." Rita hesitated. "Just do it," Tom shouted. "That's enough. If Mom is there, our position as parents." He swallowed his words, but their meaning was clear. My presence might call into question their qualifications as parents. Rita looked at me apologetically. "Barbara, I'm sorry. But..." "I understand," I answered quietly. "Let me know how Taylor is doing when you find out." Tom and Rita hurried towards the hospital entrance. I was left alone in the car. Watching them disappear into the hospital through the window, I let out a deep sigh. More than anger or sadness, only emptiness remained. And then, I made a decision. For Taylor's sake, I must uncover the truth, I thought to myself. Left alone in the parking lot of Glens Falls Hospital, I was stunned for a while. However, thinking about Taylor, I couldn't just sit still. I got out of the car and headed towards the hospital entrance. When I asked at the reception, I was told that Taylor was in the intensive care unit. I decided to wait in the waiting room to hear the doctor's explanation. After what felt like a long time, the doctor finally appeared. "Taylor's condition is stable," the doctor said. Fortunately, the oxygen supply to her brain wasn't cut off for a long time. However, the next 24 hours are crucial. I breathed a sigh of relief at those words. However, my relief was short-lived as a police officer entered the waiting room. "We'd like to ask you about the circumstances of the accident," the officer said. I explained the sequence of events, but I noticed that Tom and Rita were nowhere to be seen. When I asked the officer, he said they had already finished giving their statements and left. That's strange, I thought. Why would they leave in such a hurry when their granddaughter's life was in danger? As I answered the officer's questions, a sense of unease grew within me. Tom and Rita's attitude, and the situation they described, something wasn't right. After the questioning was over, I decided to return to the park. There must be something I had overlooked. When I arrived at the park, traces of the barbecue were still there. I looked around, wondering if there were any witnesses. That's when I noticed a family having a picnic nearby. Gathering my courage, I approached them, and they kindly responded. "Yes, we did see a child fall into the water," the father of the family said. "Actually, we were filming my daughter's birthday. It might be in the background of our video." My heart raced. "Would you mind showing that video to the police?" They readily agreed. I immediately contacted the police, and we arranged to check the video. The police officer's expression changed as he watched the footage. "This is an unexpected development." I was also shown the video. What it showed was Tom leading Taylor close to the river. It wasn't an accident. It was intentional. I was speechless with shock. The police officer seized the video as evidence and said he would conduct further investigation. In a daze, I returned to my home in Manhattan. My mind was in turmoil, and my heart was filled with pain. Why would Tom do such a thing? The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of the doorbell. It was the police. "We found new evidence," the detective said. "We'd like to talk to you about the contents of the video." I led them to the living room and listened to the detective's words with bated breath. "We've analyzed yesterday's video in detail," the detective began. "What we found is that this wasn't just an accident." The detective took out a tablet and played the video. The clearer footage showed Tom leading Taylor by the hand to the river and gently pushing her. Why? I was at a loss for words. "Furthermore, when we checked your family's bank records, we found that there have been large debts recently," the detective continued. "And Taylor had a high-value life insurance policy." At that moment, all the pieces fell into place. Financial distress, Taylor's medical expenses, and insurance fraud. "I can't believe it," I muttered. Just then, I heard the sound of the door opening. Tom and Rita had returned. I could see their faces turn pale. They froze when they saw the police in the living room. "What happened?" Rita asked in a trembling voice. The detective stood up and said to them, "Mr. Tom, Mrs. Rita. New evidence has been found regarding Taylor's accident." The blood drained from Tom's face. "What do you mean?" The detective showed them the video. While watching the footage, Rita let out a scream, and Tom collapsed into a chair. "Why?" I cried out in tears. "Why did you do this?" Tom covered his face with both hands and began to sob. We had no choice. Rita continued, we couldn't pay for Taylor's treatment, the debts kept piling up. But to try to kill her? I said, my voice shaking. We didn't mean to kill her. Tom shouted. We just needed the insurance money. We only meant to hurt Taylor a little. But I was at a loss for words. I knew about the couple's financial situation, but I never imagined it would come to this. Why didn't you talk to me? I said, filled with sadness and anger. Rita answered, crying, we were ashamed. Our pride got in the way. The detective quietly said, both of you will need to come with us to the station. Tom and Rita complied without resistance. As I watched them being taken away, various emotions swirled within me. Anger, sadness, and deep disappointment. Left alone in the room, I stared blankly out the window. The desire to save my family and the anger at their actions conflicted within me. However, one thing was clear. The strong determination that I must protect Taylor. I stood up and began preparing to go to the hospital. The road ahead would be difficult. But for Taylor's sake, and for the future of our family, I must continue to move forward. A few days after Tom and Rita's arrest, I was meeting with a lawyer. The trial of the two, charged with attempted felony and child abuse, was about to begin. To be honest, Barbara, the situation is dire, the lawyer said. The evidence is conclusive. I let out a deep sigh. I understand. But they are Taylor's parents. Isn't there any way to help them? The lawyer chose his words carefully. We'll do our best, but prison time is unavoidable. Right now, we should prioritize Taylor. Those words brought me back to reality. Yes, Taylor is the top priority now. The next day, an official from the New York State Child Protective Services CPS came to visit. We'd like to discuss Taylor's future, the CPS official said. Are you planning to put her in a facility? I asked anxiously. Well. The official hesitated a bit. If care by a blood relative is possible, we believe that would be best. Those words gave me hope. Would it be possible for me to raise her? That's definitely worth considering, the official replied. However, there will be a rigorous review process. For the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly to gain custody. Home visits, psychological evaluations, financial status checks. I cleared each process one by one. At the same time, Tom and Rita's trial was progressing. They pleaded guilty and asked for leniency. The court considered their financial hardship but also pointed out the severity of the crime. In the end, Tom was sentenced to 7 years in prison and Rita to 5 years. When I heard the verdict, my feelings were complex. Their actions were unforgivable. But they, too, had been suffering. About a month after the trial ended, I received a call from CPS. Barbara, after our review, we've decided to grant you temporary custody of Taylor, they said. I couldn't help but cry at those words. Thank you. I'll do my very best to raise Taylor. However, the CPS official added, but regular supervision and reports will be necessary. And please understand that there may be a reevaluation depending on the situation after her parents are released. I nodded deeply. This wasn't an end, but a new beginning. As I prepared to welcome Taylor, I renewed my determination to provide this child with a safe and loving environment, and to act as a bridge, hoping that one day the whole family could heal and reconnect. It won't be an easy journey. But for Taylor's sake, and for the family's sake, I was prepared to give it my all. Our new life with Taylor began in my Manhattan apartment. The first few weeks were challenging as we adjusted, but gradually a new routine took shape. "Grandma, are we going to the park today?" Taylor asks with a smile at breakfast. "Let's see, we'll go in the afternoon. Remember, we have a doctor's appointment in the morning, okay?" Taylor's face clouds over a bit, but she quickly nods brightly. "Okay, I understand." The regular therapy at the Child Mind Institute was having a remarkable effect on Taylor. Her language skills were improving, and she was gradually developing social skills. I was changing too. I started volunteering at the New York Foundling, supporting children in similar situations. "Barbara, your experience is inspiring many people," a staff member at the facility told me. "Indeed, the journey is challenging. But every time I see Taylor smile, I gain strength. And I spend each day hoping that when Tom and Rita return someday, we can start anew as a healed family." A year has passed since then. Squinting at the morning sun streaming through the window, I quietly sip my coffee. Taylor is still asleep. Over this past year, we've overcome many difficulties. My heart ached many times seeing Taylor cry at night or long for her parents. But gradually, she regained her smile, and now she started attending kindergarten. "Grandma, are we going to see Mom and Dad today?" I smiled gently at Taylor's question. "Yes, we are. It's visitation day, isn't it? Monthly visits to the prison. While serving their sentences, Tom and Rita are seriously engaged in counseling and educational programs. Every time I see the regret of the past and new determination in their eyes, my heart fills with complex emotions. They're trying to change, I remind myself. Indeed, the past cannot be changed. But the future is different. Taylor's growth, Tom and Rita's rehabilitation, and my own changes. All of these are shaping a new form of family. Through my volunteer work at the New York Foundling, I've witnessed the rebirth of many families. It should be possible for us too. "Grandma, let's go." Taylor's voice brings me back to the present. As I take her small hand, I make a quiet vow. There will surely be more difficulties ahead. But with love and patience, we can surely overcome them. And someday, we will truly become a family, in every sense of the word. Dreaming of that day, we step out into a new day. In the quiet residential neighborhood shrouded in morning mist, the maple tree in my garden casts shadows as it catches the gentle spring sunlight. This tree, which George and I planted 30 years ago when my husband was still young, has grown splendidly and watched over our family's history. I've been living alone in this house since I lost my husband 5 years ago. But I hardly have time to feel lonely, as my son Michael and his family never fail to visit every weekend. Grandma. An energetic voice echoes from the entrance. It's William, my grandson. He's a boy with surprisingly mature eyes for a 7-year-old and a pure, captivating smile. He always looks forward to visiting my house with genuine excitement. William, no running. Michael's voice follows. Despite his busy days as a middle manager at an IT company, he always makes time for family. His conscientiousness and devotion to family have remained unchanged since childhood, one of his best qualities. Mom, we're here again today. Next to arrive is Caroline, Michael's wife. Working at an advertising agency, she always appears with perfect makeup and stylish clothes. While her surface-level pleasantries are impeccable, I wonder if I'm the only one who feels a certain emotional distance that never quite bridges. Michael and Caroline met in college and married right after graduation. Back then, Caroline wasn't as ambitious as she is now. They seemed like the ideal young couple at first. However, as Caroline's work became more demanding, I noticed a gradual distance growing between them. Lately, she's been avoiding family time, citing important meetings and deadlines. As a pediatrician for many years, I've treated countless children. I believe I understand children's psychology well. I don't miss the occasional lonely expression behind William's innocent smile. Grandma, can I play in the garden today? William especially looks forward to playing in the garden. Under the maple tree, I share stories about our family's past memories with my grandson. Sometimes, I tell him heartwarming stories from my time as a doctor. William listens intently, his eyes sparkling with interest. Of course, dear. But first, let's have our tea time. Sunday afternoon tea time, it's our precious family tradition. Homemade scones and tea are laid out on the table. William happily puffs his cheeks as he reaches for his favorite chocolate cookies. Meanwhile, Caroline never lets go of her smartphone. I notice her expression subtly changing each time she checks her screen. Lately, I've heard the name David Thompson, an investment banker, mentioned several times. She says he's an important client of the advertising agency, but my intuition senses something else. David is known in the industry for his ambitious and ruthless personality. I recently learned he has a 7-year-old son with another woman. That child is the same age as William. I wonder if Michael has noticed the changes in his wife. Recently, I've been concerned about the dark circles under his eyes. He seems more pensive than usual. I worry he might be struggling with something, but my son has always tended to keep his problems to himself. Mom, I need to get going. Michael stands up as usual. Caroline says, I'll stay a bit longer, and brings up some work-related matter again. However, her eyes don't meet mine directly. As a former pediatrician and as a mother, I can't ignore the sense of unease floating within this family. Yet at the same time, I've tried to trust and accept my son's chosen partner. I believe that was my duty as a mother. Outside the window, the maple tree sways gently. The evening sun filtering through its leaves gradually changes color. Countless family memories sleep beneath this tree. However, I was beginning to sense that behind this peaceful daily life, something unknown was definitely progressing. That day, the cold rain had been falling since morning. When I woke to the sound of rain hitting the windows and stood in the kitchen to make my usual cup of tea, the phone rang. The clock showed 7:45 a.m. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the receiver. It was the police. "Mrs. Baker, your son Michael Baker has been in an accident. Please come to Greenwich Hospital immediately." In that moment, my vision distorted. It was as if the world suddenly lost all its color. When the ambulance arrived, he was still conscious. The officer's voice grew distant. I grabbed my bag and headed straight for the entrance. The rain had grown stronger, but I didn't even have the presence of mind to open an umbrella. The drive to the hospital. Each time I stopped at a traffic light, I felt like my chest would collapse. As a pediatrician, I had seen many critical patients. That experience only made me imagine the worst possible scenarios. My heart leaped at every turn at an intersection, at every sound of a siren. "Please, Michael." I arrived at the hospital with a prayer in my heart. The familiar smell of disinfectant seemed unusually strong that day. While waiting for the elevator, my legs wouldn't stop shaking. "Mrs. Baker. This way, please." A young nurse at the nurse's station quietly guided me. Her expression seemed to already bear the worst outcome. "I'm very sorry. We did everything we could, but..." The doctor's words echoed in the white hallway. I leaned against the wall, nearly collapsing. As a doctor, I had delivered bad news to families many times. But I never imagined I would be on the receiving end. The details of the accident are still under investigation, but the road was wet from the rain. The doctor continued explaining, but his words didn't reach my ears. I just kept calling my son's name. I tried calling Caroline multiple times. But I couldn't get through. The voicemail played over and over. When I finally reached her, her words still ring in my ears. "I'm in an important meeting and can't leave right now. I'll definitely be there in an hour." I thought I detected a certain composure in her voice. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. She had just lost her husband, yet there was an unnatural calmness in her voice. A week passed, and the day of the funeral arrived. Mourners dressed in black quietly gathered at the church. As the scent of white lilies wafted through the air, I stood at the front, bowing to each person. Relatives from our hometown, Michael's colleagues, my former co-workers, deep sorrow was etched on each of their faces. Caroline was perfectly made up, dressed in a black Chanel suit. She was crying. But somehow it seemed theatrical. She even showed gestures of checking her smartphone occasionally. I tried to dismiss such thoughts. Perhaps grief was distorting my mind. In a corner of the venue, I noticed an unfamiliar man. It was David Thompson. Why was he here? Would a mere client appear at such a private occasion? William didn't seem to fully understand his father's death. Still, his usual brightness was subdued, and he watched the mourners with an adult-like expression. His small frame in the black suit was painfully touching. Suddenly, a small hand grasped mine. Warm. Alive. That sensation stirred my heart. Grandma, William whispered to me, his voice almost lost among the quiet murmur of the mourners. But his words pierced my heart sharply. Dad told me to dig under the maple tree in the garden. Those words made my body freeze. A chill ran down my spine. William, when did Dad tell you this? I asked with a trembling voice. William's innocent eyes looked straight at me. Those eyes were just like Michael's. The night before the accident. Dad came to my room and said, "Make sure to remember." At that moment, something froze inside me. Had my son sensed something coming? Or? As my thoughts began to reach that conclusion, I felt terror rising from deep within. After the funeral, as night fell, I couldn't sleep at all. Outside the window, the rain had started falling again, as if to remind me of that day. Listening to the rain, I imagined my son's final moments, my chest tightening repeatedly. The next morning, before dawn, I went out to the garden where the maple tree was wrapped in morning mist. The scene from 30 years ago when George and I planted this tree came back to me. My young husband's smile. Little Michael enjoying playing in the dirt. Those memories overlapped with the current reality, tearing at my heart. I picked up the shovel. The first dig took the most courage. The rain-soaked earth was heavy, making it difficult to dig. My gloved hands gradually transmitted the cold sensation of the soil. But William's words drove me forward. Make sure to remember. Why didn't Michael tell me directly? Why did he tell his 7-year-old son? Questions kept arising. He could have contacted me by phone. He could have sent an email. But he entrusted his final words to his pure-hearted child. After digging for about an hour, my arms were tired and sweat beaded on my forehead. Then, the shovel hit something. A dull sound. My heart raced. When I put my hand in the soil, I felt something cold. A waterproof case. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I was certain that inside this case was something my son had risked his life to convey. But at the same time, I felt afraid of knowing the truth. Opening this lid might dramatically change our lives. The morning sun began filtering through the maple leaves, as if to illuminate the truth that was about to be revealed. The mud-covered waterproof case felt heavy in my hands. I lifted it with trembling hands. It was heavy. But this weight felt like more than just physical, it was the weight of the truth my son had risked his life to tell me. As I placed my hand on the lid, a moment of hesitation crossed my mind. Back in the living room, I placed the case on the table. The morning sun streaming through the window illuminated its black surface. Taking a deep breath, I slowly opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a white envelope. It bore my son's handwriting, "To Mom." Beneath it were multiple documents stacked together. And a silver USB drive. I took out the letter. The sound of breaking the seal echoed in the quiet room. To Mom. If anything happens to me, please open this case. You may be shocked to learn the truth, but William is my son. Even though we're not blood related, I've loved him for these 7 years. But I can't leave him with Caroline. Please look at the enclosed evidence to understand why. Michael. My hands shook so much I dropped the letter once. The words, "not blood related," echoed in my mind. Opening the documents beneath, I found DNA test results. I was familiar with reading these types of test results. However, at this moment, no professional knowledge was necessary. The result was clear. William was not Michael's biological child. Next, I found a photograph. Caroline and David in an intimate pose. It was dated 7 years ago, before William was born. Beneath it were more photos stacked together. Evidence showing their relationship had continued for over 7 years. The most shocking was the existence of one particular photo. David with another 7-year-old boy. The child's expression somewhat resembled William's. On the back was a date and the words, "with my son." A child the same age as William. The truth was gradually taking shape. With trembling hands, I inserted the USB drive into my computer. There I found evidence my son had meticulously gathered. Email exchanges. Phone records. Bank transaction histories. And the most terrifying discovery, messages suggesting Caroline and David's plan to murder disguised as an accident. Caroline's words, "I absolutely can't leave the meeting," came back with new meaning. Creating a perfect alibi. It had been part of the plan. Before calling the police, I reviewed all the evidence once more. The composure I had cultivated over years as a doctor came in handy at this moment. Don't let emotions take over, first organize the facts. While explaining the situation at the police station, my voice was surprisingly calm. The detectives examined the evidence with serious expressions. They particularly focused on the email exchanges from the morning of the accident. "Mrs. Baker, let us check the security camera footage near the accident site." I nodded at the detective's words. The monitor showed a rain-soaked mountain road. Michael's car enters the frame. And then, right after, a black SUV approaches rapidly, while another car closes in from behind. My son would have had no way to avoid it. The driver was undoubtedly David Thompson. We can confirm the car behind was Caroline Baker's. The detective's voice rang cold. Furthermore, the owner of a nearby coffee shop provided eyewitness testimony. They had seen a black SUV and a silver car waiting just before the accident. So it was a premeditated murder. The detective nodded gravely at my question. As the truth came to light, my emotions swayed complexly. Deep love for my son. Anxiety about William's future. And anger toward Caroline and David who had plotted this deliberate murder. However, what stayed with me most were the words from my son's letter. "William is my son." My son knew there were things more important than blood ties. I must absolutely protect that sentiment. As I left the police station, there was a faint light in the sky. As if the long dark night was finally breaking. A quiet but certain resolve was growing within me for the new battle ahead. A week after submitting the evidence to the police, the investigation progressed rapidly. The detectives analyzed the security camera footage in detail and conducted thorough interviews around the scene. Then, decisive evidence was found. "Mrs. Baker," the detective's voice was filled with certainty. "Arrest warrants have been issued." That evening, Caroline and David were arrested at their respective workplaces. The evening news showed Caroline being led away in handcuffs from the advertising agency office. Under her perfect makeup, her expression was cold as ice. I did nothing wrong. I just wanted to be happy. Her words at the time of arrest still ring in my ears. 3 months after the incident, in a courtroom where autumn was beginning to make itself felt, all the truth was revealed. The prosecutor presented evidence one by one as the gallery watched with bated breath. The defendants Caroline and David Thompson murdered victim Michael Baker under a carefully crafted plan. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. The screen displayed detailed diagrams of the accident scene. Friday, March 15, 2024, 7:30 a.m. A single-lane mountain road in the suburbs. The details of that day were meticulously explained. David's black SUV lay in wait along the victim's commute route. Simultaneously, Caroline pursued from behind in another vehicle. On the sparsely populated mountain road, they sandwiched him and forced him off the cliff. The security camera footage played. The misty mountain road. Michael's car entering the frame. Then the black SUV and silver car. My son had no chance to escape. Watching the footage, I felt my chest tighten imagining my son's terror in that moment. Furthermore, to make it appear as an accident, the defendants erased brake marks at the scene. Caroline deliberately delayed her arrival at the hospital citing an important meeting, among other perfect alibi preparations. Evidence was presented one after another. Caroline and David's email exchanges. Phone records. Bank transaction histories. And the beginning of their relationship was revealed. 7 years ago, Caroline met David during a major advertising agency project. Attracted to his position, wealth, and ambition, she quickly began an affair. At that time, I believed my son was living a happy married life. Behind that, betrayal had already begun. Michael wasn't enough for me. He lacked ambition. Caroline's testimony in court drew sighs from the gallery. Her voice showed not a hint of regret. The motive for the crime gradually became clear. Michael had begun to notice the truth. The DNA test results. Evidence of the affair. And the most shocking fact, William was actually David's child. Moreover, David had another child of the same age. The existence of my son could have damaged my reputation at the company. David's testimony. He feared his son's existence would threaten his position at the company. Combined with Caroline's desire to avoid dividing assets in a divorce, the two decided on murder. The prosecution also revealed why my son entrusted the truth to 7-year-old William. Michael's phone was constantly monitored by Caroline. Emails, calls, all records were under her surveillance. Direct contact with me would have been immediately noticed. The victim Michael Baker was under complete surveillance by his wife, the prosecutor's voice rang out. However, he believed she wouldn't be suspicious of conversations with an innocent child. Furthermore, Michael's diary was found during the investigation. It contained his deep love for his son and his final decision. William will surely remember my words. An innocent child's memory cannot be erased by adult schemes. And Mom will surely understand the truth. As a pediatrician, she knows better than anyone the weight of a child's words. I held back tears in court as I heard these words. Until the very end, my son had calmly assessed the situation and chosen the most reliable method. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt the child. I just wanted to switch to a new life. Caroline refused to acknowledge her guilt until the end. Wrapped in perfect makeup and black clothing, she sat with dignity. But her eyes were hollow. Her attitude didn't change even when confronted with the facts. David, on the other hand, changed his stance partway through. Probably on his lawyer's advice. Betraying Caroline, he admitted to all crimes. He must have thought it was the only way to reduce his sentence. However, the outcome didn't change. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was filled with unprecedented tension. Defendant Caroline Baker, the judge's voice resonated heavily. For the crimes of first-degree murder and evidence tampering, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Caroline's expression crumbled for the first time. Defendant David Thompson. For the crimes of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and conspiracy, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A deep silence fell over the courtroom. A week after the verdict, a custody hearing was held. I presented my experience working as a doctor, stable living foundation, and most importantly, my deep bond with William. My son, knowing there was no blood relation, loved William for 7 years. I want to carry on that love. The court considered both parents' imprisonment for serious crimes, along with the substantial 7-year grandparent-grandchild relationship between William and me. Full custody was transferred to me. Mrs. Baker, we entrust your grandson's upbringing to you. I bowed deeply at the judge's words. I will surely make him happy. 1 month after that promise. In the autumn twilight. William and I sit together under the maple tree. The leaves are beginning to change color, glowing in the setting sun. Grandma, do you remember Dad? William's sudden question makes my chest tighten. Those eyes are just like Michael's. Even without blood ties, 7 years of love were definitely there. My son was right. An innocent child's memory had indeed carried the truth. Of course, dear. Your dad, you know, loved you more than anything. Whether you're related by blood or not doesn't matter for true parent and child. Yes. Dad always protected me. Tears glisten in William's eyes. I quietly embrace my grandson. His small body trembles slightly. Your dad's love is proof of true parenthood. And Grandma will always protect you too. The evening light gently wraps around the two of us. The maple leaves sway in the breeze. Under this tree, our family's memories will live on forever. The truth behind the incident has been revealed, and the perpetrators have been judged. But this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new family story. An unknown future stretches before William and me. The truth and love that my son gave his life to protect. We will continue to live cherishing these always. Under the maple tree, the autumn wind blows quietly. Tomorrow will surely bring gentler sunshine than yesterday. Believing this, we take our new step forward. Jake, breakfast is ready. I called out my son's name while transferring pancakes from the skillet to a plate in the kitchen. Even in December, Phoenix mornings are crisp and refreshing. The morning sun streaming through the window cast an amber glow through the maple syrup bottle on the counter. Coming. I heard an energetic response from upstairs, followed by the sound of little feet scampering down the stairs. Then appeared my 6-year-old son Jake, wearing Spider-Man pajamas. His slightly disheveled brown hair and big blue eyes were identical to my ex-husband, whom I separated from 5 years ago. "Oh my, still in your pajamas. You'll be late for school." The clock already showed 6:45. It takes 15 minutes by car to Desert Springs Elementary in the Paradise Valley Unified School District. We need to hurry to make it for the 7:30 start time. "But Mom, I can't find my Spidey shoes," Jake said worriedly as he sat in his chair. His beloved Spider-Man shoes were a birthday present from his father last month. Since then, he won't go out without wearing them. "Did you check the shoe rack by the door properly?" "Yes." "Then I'll look for them. You eat your breakfast in the meantime." I gently patted Jake's head as he hesitated in front of the warm pancakes, then headed to the entryway. When I opened the shoe rack, sure enough, the red and blue Spider-Man shoes were neatly arranged on the bottom shelf. "Found them." When I announced this, a relieved "yay" came back from the dining room. These ordinary exchanges are our daily routine. I'm Lisa Walker, a 33-year-old single mother working in accounting at Fry's Food Store, a local supermarket chain. I've always been good with numbers since high school, and after marriage and childbirth, I got my accounting certification. Now I work full-time while living with my only son and my father, who requires nursing care. "Good morning, Grandpa." Jake, having finished his meal, went to peek into my father's room on the first floor. My father Thomas suffered a stroke 3 years ago, leaving his right side paralyzed and requiring nursing care. He used to be a high school teacher in the area and raised my sister Rachel and me with great dedication to education. "Ah, Jake. You look energetic today." Father reached out his left hand from his seated position on the bed to pat Jake's head. The gesture was identical to how he used to pat us sisters. "The home health aide, Martha, said she'll be here at 9 today." Father nodded slightly when I reported this. "We use home care services on weekdays. Since my mother passed away 5 years ago, this service has been supporting our life with Father." "All right, Jake, time to get dressed." At my hurrying voice, my son waved to his grandfather and bounded up to the second floor. Our morning routine is always precisely timed. Wake up at 6, finish breakfast, get ready, leave home at 7. After dropping my son off at school, my work starts from 8 until 5. My job in the supermarket's accounting department is more fulfilling than I expected. Working with numbers, which I've been good at since high school, might be my true calling. My colleagues are understanding and even allow me to check on my father during lunch breaks. After school, Jake spends time in the after-school program. Though he's not enrolled in any specific activities, I want him to value time spent playing with children his age. He has a bright and sociable personality, and the program staff evaluate him as a child with many friends. When I pick him up after finishing work at 6, he always runs up to me with a beaming smile, calling Mom. Then we head home for dinner preparation, helping Father, and checking Jake's homework. Time flows busily but warmly. Weekends revolve around taking Father to his medical appointments. Though the drive to Honor Health Scottsdale Thompson Peak is a bit far, Father is satisfied with the treatment there. He seems to be starting to think about inheritance matters lately, but for me, his health is the primary concern. I meet with my ex-husband once a month for Jake's visitation. Our divorce 5 years ago was amicable, without any settlement payments. We maintain a good relationship, partly for Jake's sake. On the other hand, I've been out of touch with my sister Rachel for 3 years. We became estranged over disagreements about father's care. The residential area of Paradise Valley is already starting its Christmas decorations this year. Though neighborhood relationships are modest, they're warm, and I'm proud to live in this area. While we're not wealthy, we manage to get by with father's pension and my salary. "Hey Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Jake tugged at my arm while I was lost in thought. "Well, how about a rotisserie chicken from Safeway?" "Yay! I love that." My son's smile blows away my fatigue. I believed such simple happiness would surely continue forever. December in Phoenix sees early sunsets. After 4:30 p.m., dusk begins to settle in. In the car heading to the after-school program after work, I was thinking about tomorrow's menu. During this season, the warm light from Desert Springs Elementary School's after-school program building melts into the winter twilight. "Mom!" When Jake spotted me, he ran up with his usual beaming smile. The sound of his Spider-Man shoes tapping lightly on the floor echoed in the quiet hallway. "Today in art class, I made a dinosaur with clay. The teacher said it was really good." Holding hands, my son happily continued talking about his school day. Even after getting in the car, his stories continued with, "and then." We turned from Cave Creek Road onto Tatum Boulevard, following our usual route home. However, when our house came into view, I felt my spine freeze. 2 police cars were parked in front of the house. The words, "Phoenix Police Department," glowed blue in the twilight. 2 uniformed officers and a man and woman in plain clothes appeared to be waiting by the front door. "Look, police officers." Jake pointed curiously. I pulled the car over to the curb with stiff hands and turned off the engine. My heart was pounding violently. I had a feeling that something terribly wrong was happening. When I got out of the car, the woman in plain clothes stepped forward. Showing her badge, she announced in a cold voice. "Mrs. Lisa Walker. We're here to arrest your son Jake on suspicion of theft." My mind went blank. There must be some mistake. My voice was trembling. I unconsciously tightened my grip on Jake's hand. "Mom, that's not true." My son cried out tearfully. His voice made my heart feel like it was shattering into 1,000 pieces. The other plainclothes detective held out a smartphone. It showed security camera footage from the Target superstore in Paradise Valley Mall. On the screen was indeed a boy who looked exactly like Jake. The same Spider-Man shoes. The same height. The same hairstyle. I couldn't find words. We've confirmed 3 incidents between December 1st and 15th. The female detective continued matter-of-factly. The total value of stolen goods exceeds $5,000. The main items are a limited edition Dragon Quest Masters gaming console worth $500, a complete set of rare figures worth $2,000, and various games and toys totaling $2,500. But, that's... Beside me, Jake was trembling slightly. Multiple classmates have testified to receiving the stolen items. Additionally, all crimes occurred between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., coinciding with the after-school program's free time. No, I didn't. The male detective cut off Jake's desperate voice. The shoe prints also match. We'd like to discuss this matter in detail at the station. During the drive to North Mountain Precinct following the police car, my mind was in chaos. I need to contact father. I need to tell Martha, the home health aide, I'll be late. A lawyer. Various tasks kept surfacing and disappearing in my mind. The police station was wrapped in an unusual tension. When we were shown to the interrogation room, the female detective's attitude suddenly softened. Probably considering Jake's age. However, the male detective maintained his stern expression. "Jake, would you like to talk to us?" The female detective spoke gently. But my son, clinging to me, just shook his head vigorously. His tear-stained cheek touched my arm. "If you tell us the truth, we'll be as accommodating as possible." The male detective pointed to the security camera photos spread on the desk. 3 photos. Indeed, they all looked exactly like Jake. But no, I didn't do it. Jake's cry echoed through the stark interrogation room. While holding my son's shoulders, I was thinking desperately. Searching through memories. True, Jake had recently become interested in games. But I don't remember him begging for a new game console. And the figures. May I call a lawyer? Finally regaining my composure, I made this request. The female detective nodded slightly. Of course. In the meantime, we'll check your child's belongings. The contents of his backpack were carefully examined one by one. Textbooks. Notebooks. Lunch bag. All just normal elementary school items. Outside had completely darkened. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station, I held my son tightly. Was this a nightmare? If I woke up, would our normal daily life, wrapped in the scent of morning pancakes, return? But reality was mercilessly bearing down on us. The interrogation room door opened, and our waiting lawyer, Joseph Martin, entered. He was a veteran lawyer introduced through father's acquaintance. He approached us with a calm expression and first gently patted Jake's head. "It's okay, Jake. I'll definitely help you." At those words, Jake's trembling seemed to ease slightly. Attorney Martin turned to face the police and first requested that no further questioning be conducted today, arguing that late-night interrogation was inappropriate for a first-grade elementary student. "Let's set up a discussion tomorrow. Tonight, please let this child go home." After some deliberation, the detectives permitted us to go home. However, with the condition that we return to the police station at 10 a.m. tomorrow. When we left the station, the cold night air touched our cheeks. Jake, who got into the car, was still trembling slightly. His reflection in the rearview mirror had completely lost his usual bright expression. "Hey, Mom." "Yes. Do we have to go back to that place tomorrow?" I couldn't answer my son's trembling question. I could only squeeze his hand tightly. While driving through the quiet residential streets of Paradise Valley, my head was filled with questions that kept surfacing. Why did this happen? Why did my son have to face such suspicion? And above all, how could we overcome this situation? The next morning, when I called Desert Springs Elementary School, Principal Anderson's voice was cold. "Mrs. Walker, I'm very sorry, but we'd like Jake to stay home until this situation is resolved." The businesslike tone made my heart constrict. But nothing has been proven yet. Multiple students have testified to receiving expensive games and figures from Jake. We're receiving many complaints from parents. Receiving students. I desperately searched my memory, going through Jake's close friends one by one. Who, under what circumstances, would have given such testimony? Could you tell me the names of the children? I'm sorry, but since this is an ongoing investigation. After hanging up the phone, I collapsed onto the living room sofa. Outside the window, the morning sun was shining as usual. But I had a sensation of the world's colors gradually fading away. "Mom." A small voice came from the top of the stairs. It was Jake. Last night he had woken up from nightmares multiple times, finally falling asleep only towards morning. In his pale blue pajamas, he looked at me anxiously. "Don't I have to go to school?" I couldn't answer that question. Instead, I went up the stairs and held him tightly. His small body was trembling slightly. I explained the situation to my supervisor Margaret and took some time off. "Lisa, I know your son. I can't believe he would shoplift. Take as many days as you need to get to the bottom of this." Her voice over the phone carried warm consideration. Encouraging messages kept arriving from colleagues too. "Let me know if there's anything I can help with. We believe in Jake." However, the reaction from the neighborhood was the opposite. Mrs. Brown from next door, whom I met while taking out the morning garbage, clearly avoided eye contact with me. The greeting we used to always exchange was now just a small murmur into empty space. Martha, who comes to care for father, seemed to have heard the neighborhood rumors too. Everyone seemed surprised that this happened in such a quiet residential area. Her expression as she conveyed this indirectly made me feel unable to stay there. 5 years since starting our life in Paradise Valley. Now, my son and I were gradually becoming isolated from the community we had finally gotten used to. The second police interview. This time we were allowed to examine the security camera footage in detail. Indeed, a boy who looked exactly like Jake. But something felt off. The way he walked. His expression. At this time, my son should have definitely been in after-school care. There should be records, right? However, the detective coldly stated that the video timestamp completely matches the after-school program's free time. 3 incidents. Thursday, December 1st, Thursday the 8th, and Thursday the 15th. All between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. After returning home, I wrote out a timeline in my notebook. Evidence of alibis. Unnatural points. Noting down concerning aspects one after another. I also requested verification of the security camera footage. But they said results wouldn't come immediately. The hardest part was seeing Jake's condition. "Hey Mom, will Santa still come this year?" With just a week until Christmas, there was no hope in my son's voice. During what should be an exciting season, Jake became increasingly withdrawn to his room. He stopped wearing his Spider-Man shoes. Calls from friends gradually decreased. Even weekend visits with his father, which were previously arranged, now seemed to weigh heavily on him. I didn't do anything wrong. At night, while sleeping next to him, Jake muttered softly, "I believe you." While holding him tightly, I declared, continuing to believe in this child. That was the only certain thing I could do right now. I visited the Target superstore several times. The location of security cameras, the product display areas, and information about the students who supposedly received the stolen goods. Little by little, but surely, we had to get closer to the truth. I also consulted with the Paradise Valley Unified School District office. Mr. Blake, Jake's teacher, testified about his usual behavior. He's a bright and honest student. I've never seen him bully others or tell lies. But now, even those words couldn't change the situation. Cars passing in front of our house clearly slowed down to observe us. Anonymous letters of criticism began to appear in our mail. Should we move away? We also needed to consider placing father in a care facility. However, there were things to do before that. The footage of the incidents, the students who received the goods, and the existence of a boy who looked exactly like Jake. I will definitely unravel these mysteries. The situation changed when that phone call came. "Mrs. Walker, this is Phoenix PD North Mountain Precinct. We've found new footage. Could you come immediately?" When I arrived at the police station, that female detective was waiting. The monitor showed footage from a different angle at the Target superstore. This is from a security camera near the emergency exit at the back of the store. It's filmed from a different location than the previous footage, but the footage clearly showed a boy who looked just like Jake. But this time, he wasn't alone. A woman in a suit was holding the boy's hand. And more than anything, this child's walk is different from Jake's. I couldn't help but exclaim. The boy in the footage had a slight limp in his right foot. Though he wore the same Spider-Man shoes, his movement was clearly different from Jake's. Actually, we also received photos from a shopper. The photo the detective presented showed a clear profile of the woman. A familiar profile. But it was my sister, who had been out of contact for 3 years. Rachel. The moment I spoke that name, all the pieces started falling into place. The police quickly changed the direction of their investigation. Rachel Walker. My sister, who had cut off contact 3 years ago over disagreements about father's care. And she had a son, Daniel, the same age as Jake. When school photos were obtained, the striking similarity between Daniel and Jake became apparent. Eyes shaped like father's. Nose bridged like mother's. They looked so identical, it was hard to believe they were just cousins. What proved decisive was the re-questioning of witnesses. Actually, the toys were given to me by a lady I didn't know. One student nervously began to speak. He said she approached him in the parking lot, saying, "I have something nice for you." But she told me to keep quiet. I was scared. Similar testimonies began to gather. Rachel had been systematically distributing stolen goods to Jake's classmates. Moreover, she had carefully chosen when to do it. On Thursdays, there's free time in after-school care, so Jake could slip out. Meticulous preparation to make it seem that way. Making her son wear the same Spider-Man shoes, committing crimes at the same time. Silencing the children who received the goods, to use as evidence later. Everything was planned to frame my son. And Jake's alibis were verified one after another. During Thursday free time, Jake was always in the art room playing with clay. The after-school care instructor testified. At the time shown on the security cameras, my son was definitely inside the school. Rachel had been living about 30 minutes by car from father's house. After her divorce, she had been moving between part-time jobs due to financial difficulties. And she had been harboring resentment towards me for taking sole responsibility for father's care. Let me help with dad's care too. I should have rights to the house too, shouldn't I? That's what my sister had demanded 3 years ago. But by then, father was already accustomed to living with me and strongly refused to change his environment. After that, Rachel suddenly cut off contact and moved away. Mounting financial struggles. Late child support payments. And anxiety over inheritance rights to father's house. All of these had cast shadows on my sister's heart. The arrest was carried out quietly. Rachel offered no resistance and admitted to all charges. Her son Daniel had just followed along, told he would get games, without knowing his mother's plan. My sister takes everything. Her words in the interrogation room left me speechless. I never knew my own sister's hatred ran so deep. When the truth of the incident came to light, circumstances changed rapidly. Desert Springs Elementary School officially approved Jake's return. Principal Anderson personally offered words of apology at a school assembly. We now know that Jake did nothing wrong. Let's all get along well again. Classmates gradually began to speak to Jake again. Tentatively, but with genuine kindness. Even the children who had received the goods came to apologize with their parents. The neighborhood's attitude changed too. You've been through so much. I'm truly sorry. Mrs. Brown came to visit with a homemade chocolate cake. Our warm relationships began returning one by one. When we got home, Jake was wearing his Spider-Man shoes for the first time in a while. Mom, can I go to the park? His voice had regained its lost vitality. On Christmas Eve night, we were quietly embracing in front of the living room tree. Father joined us in his wheelchair, sharing this small family moment. Outside, stars twinkled in the Paradise Valley night sky. The painful days we'd been through seemed to fade away like a bad dream. Rachel's arrest was carried out that evening. When Phoenix PD investigators surrounded her apartment, she seemed to have already realized everything. I'm sorry. Just before being handcuffed, she whispered softly to me. Her eyes mixed hatred, regret, and deep exhaustion. Daniel, standing beside her, stood dazed, unable to comprehend what was happening. I'll take care of Daniel. How painful it was to say those words. But I felt it was my responsibility as a sister and an aunt. During the trial after indictment, all the truth came to light. After her divorce, Rachel had accumulated debt from financial hardship and pinned her hopes on inheritance rights to father's house. However, she felt those hopes were dashed when father chose to live with me. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 4 years, for charges of theft and exploitation of a minor. Rachel kept her head deeply bowed as the verdict was delivered in court. Afterward, she entered a rehabilitation program and began receiving counseling. Daniel temporarily stayed at a children's home but was arranged to spend weekends at our house. Christmas morning, 2 red boots were placed in the living room. One for Jake and one for Daniel. The 2 children were initially shy and kept their distance, but gradually warmed up to each other while opening presents. "Hey, Mom." Jake looked up at me while spreading out his presents. "Will Aunt Rachel be able to spend Christmas with us again someday?" That innocent question made my eyes well up. Indeed, the wounds were deep and would take time to heal. But I too secretly hoped for the day when we could gather again as a family. Father watched silently from his wheelchair. Quiet tears glistened in his eyes. As the new year arrived, tranquility returned to Paradise Valley. But it was different from before, carrying a gentler air. Though wounded, we had found stronger, deeper connections. While slipping Santa's letter into the red boots by the entrance, I found myself praying. May we spend next Christmas with Rachel too. And may this family's wounds heal, little by little.